Hello, and welcome to the YMCA San Francisco's Classrooms for All. My name is Reesha, and today we are going to be learning about climate action through planting plants at home. If you want to follow along, what you will need today are some plants that you could get at the grocery store, like scallions or basil or some lettuce. Or an avocado and some houseplants if you want to. You can also make use of some to-go containers or an egg carton. And if you want, you can also get some seeds. I'll also be using some scissors today, and you should always make sure to ask for permission from your grown-up before doing a big project in the kitchen. One of the ways we're going to start our time together today is by taking a nice deep breath. Breathing in gratitude, breathing out gratitude for taking this time together. I'm so glad that we're here. This is great. I also want to take a moment to give appreciation for the people who came before me on this land. I am in San Francisco right now, which is the unceded territory of the Ohlone people. Now, if you want to find out more about the land where you are, you can go to native-land.ca. It's very important for us to take a moment to acknowledge how this land is unceded, which means that it was taken forcibly. As we think about how to address climate change, which needs our attention so very much, I think that we also need to make sure that our solutions include everyone, including the people who have been disenfranchised or taken advantage of in our nation's history. And one of the ways that we can start to learn how to do that is by acknowledging that we're on land that was forcibly taken from them. So take a moment of breath in and out for appreciation for the people who came before us, and many of whom still live here today, thankfully. I feel so grateful to have the privilege of being on this land today and sharing with you ways of taking action to correct some pretty drastic changes that are happening in our climate that affect all of us. Now, one thing that you might be experiencing as you think about climate change is a feeling of being overwhelmed. I sometimes feel overwhelmed too. I know that I'm feeling overwhelmed because my mind will feel like it's really full all at once, but it's hard for me to notice my individual thoughts. Maybe I feel my heart is beating really fast, or that my shoulders get really tense. It's a great thing to take time to notice what happens in your body and how you give those feelings a name. Again, once we acknowledge what's happening, that's going to be the first step for us to make sure that we have what we need to address it. So, as we're learning today about taking climate action at home by growing food, take time to also challenge yourself to notice when you're feeling anxious about climate change, what happens in your body, and what can you do to tell yourself, we're here now, we're okay, we're gonna get through this. Sometimes giving yourself a hug, or talking to somebody at home that you really trust, or taking time to take care of your body. Breathe deeply, drink some water, take it slow, and pick one thing at a time. So our one thing at a time today is going to be growing food at home. Now let's start with something that is a little more approachable and a little easier for people who are feeling intimidated by growing food. If you have a place outside that's sunny and you have soil, that's awesome. I encourage you to use that opportunity and to invite others to come see what you're growing and keep track and make a lot of observations. But if you'd like to also grow indoors with water, or you only have a window that you can grow next to, then that is great too. I think that everyone can do this, but if you're feeling challenged, you can always get in touch with us on our website and tell me what your challenges are, and I will do my best to help you. So we're going to learn about growing in water first of all. Now, you might have a house plant that is not edible to people, but it still matters that you're growing something green in your home. You can see that this vine that I have here also has a little yellow leaf, and that'll sometimes happen. It doesn't mean that something is wrong. It doesn't always mean that something is wrong, right? Same way with our body. If I'm feeling nervous about climate change or anxious, it doesn't mean that something is wrong with my body. Maybe it means that I care a lot and my body is showing me that. So I can turn that care into another feeling if I want to. Well, with this plant, it doesn't mean something is wrong with this plant that this leaf is yellow. Maybe it's just time for that leaf to be taken off. So I can very gently remove it, just like that, and make sure this goes into my compost bin right here. What a wonderful way. We're already doing something important for the planet. Choosing to use your municipal compost instead of putting your green matter into the trash makes a big difference. When our carbon materials go into the compost and are able to go to a facility that manages the compost with the right amount of moisture, air, and microbes, that'll break down in an aerobic environment. That means with oxygen. And when it's able to break down with oxygen, it becomes rich compost that we can put back into our garden. But if we choose to put our green waste into the trash and it gets taken to the trash and the landfill instead of the compost, it goes through what's called an anaerobic decomposition. Anaerobic without oxygen. Oh, my goodness, I love breathing in oxygen. And turns out if our green matter goes through an anaerobic process, breaking down without oxygen, then something else occurs. It actually releases a lot of methane gas into our atmosphere, which is 10 times more damaging to our ozone than carbon. So one way that you can already have an impact in your home, even by doing nothing else, is by choosing to use your compost instead of your trash for green materials that can go in there. If you're curious about what qualifies as compost, often municipal bins will have guidelines on the bin itself, or you can visit Recology to find out more about what goes in my compost. Thank you so much for taking that big step. That's awesome. So I have my house plant here, and I can't eat this, but it is an incredible way for me to connect to the climate. Noticing how something is growing and exchanging my carbon dioxide and trading it in for oxygen from my plant. So I can say thank you to my vine here and breathe in some oxygen. Now, if I want to propagate a part of this vine, I could very carefully cut a part of this vine, and leaving enough stem, I want to cut right above the leaf node on the stem, and then put the stem in water. So there's a few plant parts I just mentioned here. We have our leaves, which you'll probably recognize. The leaves of different plants might look different. And we have our stem, which is the long and wiry part of this plant. Some plants don't really seem to have much of a stem, like this lettuce. Don't really seem to have much of a stem. There's a very distinct stem here. And then the leaf node, that was another thing that I mentioned. The leaf node is where the leaf and the stem come together. So I want to cut above the leaf node, so there's a lot of stem for me to put in the water. You can see here, this one has been in the water for quite some time, and there's some roots that have already grown here from the node. Isn't that amazing? Plants are incredible. I want to make sure that I change out my water regularly. If I start to see that there's algae growing in it, or it's getting kind of empty in there, those are some great signals very clear signals that it's time to put fresh, clean water. I also want to make sure that I'm putting my plant in a place where it can get sunlight. Some plants want more sunlight than others, and that's a great opportunity for a research project if you have a specific plant in mind. I've noticed that this vine in my home doesn't need to be in my sunniest window. I can actually put it in a place where it's a little more shaded in my house. So that's what I've chosen to do. And you can play around and notice what your plant is telling you. You can see this one's just been in water for a long time. This one looks like it might soon be ready to go into a pot, but it's also fun to just see the roots growing in water. And this one seems to be doing quite a great job. Amazing. Let's talk now about how to propagate food in water. Now, I have my scallions here. These have been growing in this cup for about a month. I had trimmed down the tops almost to the base of where the white part of the stem is. And what you can do is you can either tear with your hand or you can use some scissors. So it's always a good idea to make sure that your scissors are clean, because plants are living things that can actually get sick. They can get bacteria and viruses that compromise their immune system. So I don't want to be introducing bacteria to this food, to this plant, and I also don't want to be eating something that has touched scissors that have like glue and gross things on them. So these scissors are clean, and what I can do is I can just trim my scallions just like that. Oh my gosh, so fresh. This is great for a stir fry or maybe on top of some tacos or some scrambled eggs. Yum, yum, yum. I'll save this for later. And I literally just bought this bunch at the supermarket, and when I first trimmed it down, I made sure to leave quite a bit of the greenery. And you can see there's a new scallion leaf growing from the center. So when I trim, I'll leave the new one undisturbed in the center so that there's still some part of this plant that can photosynthesize. Photosynthesis is how these plants get their food. It is the process that they use to build up their own bodies. So I want to make sure this plant has some leaf available so it can photosynthesize and keep growing. I would not want to trim it down all the way to the white part. Leave some greenery and come back later. I can see there's also some dried out leaves here, so I can take those off or I can trim them. And with this, I like to make sure I change the water at least once a month. Scallions, onions, leeks, they're all in the same plant family. They're in the allium family, just like lilies. So they like to have very wet roots. So this is a great way to start your own little food plant experiment at home. Scallions in water, occasional trim. Make sure you leave enough for photosynthesis. Okay, let's see what's next. We have our lettuce. So for this lettuce, I took away a lot of the leaves already. I want to show you how if I trim back all of them, leaving about 2 inches from the bottom of the head of lettuce, just like this. This is ready to go in some water. Just plunk it in there. I don't want to completely submerge it, but I want to maybe fill it up to halfway in a cup of water and put it in a relatively sunny spot, and we'll see what happens. It'll likely regrow from the center first. And in the meantime, I want to make sure that I make good use of all of this lettuce that I just peeled away from the main plant here. Ah, so exciting. I think this is a salad in the making. Maybe with some of the scallions. I'm reusing the produce bag, and that's another great way that we can make a positive impact on our climate is reusing. You don't always have to use plastic. I often will bring in a cloth bag to the grocery store, or if you have like an old stained clean pillowcase, that can also double as a bag, and then it can just go in the wash in between your trips to the market or grocery store. talk about our basil. Ooh, I love basil. Oh my goodness. I've noticed that if I'm feeling kind of down or my mood is feeling a little low, when I engage in my sense of smell, I notice my mood changes. What about you? What senses do you engage when you want to change your mood? Now this is very exciting because I see from this bunch basil that I got from the supermarket, this has been in water for about a month, and I've noticed in that time, the plant has started to divert its energy from its leaves into producing flowers. Now these flowers are actually edible. You can eat them. What a beautiful addition to our salad. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give this plant a signal that it's time to re-divert its energy away from making flowers back into its leaves. So I'm going to trim these flowers right off. Now if I were to put this outside, these flowers have the ability to attract pollinators with their nectar and pollen, and even some of their coloration. You and I can only see a certain limited range of light spectrum, which informs the kinds of colors that we see. But for insects or birds or even bats or spiders, these are different kinds of pollinators, their vision is different from ours, and they might even see this white flower in all sorts of technicolor hues, which attract them to come and drink nectar and in the process bring pollen from different flowers. And that cross-pollination is what gives this plant what it needs to make a seed. So I have here a purchased bag of seeds. These seeds came from a basil plant that had a pollinator sufficiently visit and convert what it had into making a seed. Oh my goodness, we could actually go all the way to college and beyond just talking about pollinators and making seeds. But in our limited time today learning about growing food at home, we're going to move ahead with trimming these flowers and telling this plant it's time to focus on leaves, not seeds. So again, I'm using my clean scissors and I'm trimming in the leaf node just below the flowers. I'll put this aside for my beautiful aromatic flowered salad. I'm even going to trim some of the buds. A bud is an unopened flower, so I'm going to trim the buds. Leaving behind just the leaves. And you'll notice there's even some branching going on here. Basil's in the mint family, and I know that because it has serrated leaves, and it has a square stem. So the same way that maybe if you take a family photo, sometimes you'll notice some of the cousins in your family might have the same shaped nose or the same kind of hair. It's the same with plants, not always. You know, families can look very different from each other, the same way that plants in the same family can look different from each other. But sometimes these plants will tell us how they're related if we pay close attention. So I'm going to trim all of these little branches off, and I'm going to leave behind, remember I need to leave behind enough so that it photosynthesizes. And I'm going to be pretty deliberate with how much basil I'm taking here. That looks quite different. Same thing here. I'm going to make sure to trim alongside the stem, and if possible I try to make a small clean cut so that the plant does not have to do a lot of work to repair the wound that I have left. The same way that you and I have signals in our body to send a scab when we get a cut and heal us and prevent bacteria from going inside and making us sick, these plants will do their best to send their bodies a signal to heal in the area where I cut. So the next part is to make sure that there's water, clean water, in the water vessel. I made a diagonal cut on the bottom so that I could maximize the amount of area where the water can get in. And then I'll check on this in a few days, making sure it's in a sunny spot where those leaves can photosynthesize. I have so much basil available for my salad. This is fantastic. Oh my goodness. I'm going to reuse this container. To keep my basil fresh and clean. One way to make a positive impact on the climate is to minimize your food waste in the beginning of the cycle of when it comes into your home. So one tip that I have for keeping herbs fresh, so you don't end up tossing them before you get a chance to eat them, is to keep them like a bouquet in your home. Keep them in water. Sometimes they can go into the fridge as well, maybe with a bag over the top. But if you cut the stems and put them in water like flowers, I think that you'll see a big difference. So pay attention to how your food is keeping and maybe what needs to be circulated in the fridge, or what are some ways that you can minimize your food waste and make sure that it gets eaten before it gets tossed. We've done so many things already, and there's one more. So this is our last example of growing food in water at home. Do you know what this is? What is this weird little alien thing? I've noticed the seed actually has started to photosynthesize a little bit. It's green, but it actually came from the inside of a fruit. And this fruit has a very dark, almost leathery skin. And the flesh of the fruit is creamy and green. And I love to put it in my guacamole. Did you guess that this is an avocado pit? Because you'd be right. This came from an avocado. So when I opened the avocado, I was very careful to scoop out the flesh of the fruit and take away the peel. And with the seed of the avocado, I kept it in a glass of water for about 2 weeks until I was able to peel off the brown skin. And then I very carefully poked in some toothpicks with the pointy side of the seed pointing up and the flat side, the flat part of the seed pointing down, covered in water. So after making sure that this stayed in water for about 2 months, this is what it looks like. It has all these roots. I made sure to change out this water every week or so, and in maybe a few more months, it might even start to have a little leaf growth here too. So making sure this stays in a sunny spot, even though there's no leaves yet, can help tell this plant it's time to make some leaves. So we just spent some time learning about how to grow food from cuttings and how to propagate into water. We learned about lettuce, we learned about house plants, we learned about parts of the plant like the leaves, the stem, the leaf node, the roots, scallions, basil. We learned about how plants can be related to each other, and sometimes they'll even show us how, and avocado. But what about if I have seeds that I want to use? Well, if you have seeds that either you have collected or been gifted from a friend, or have even gone out to purchase yourself, or have maybe received maybe at the farmer's market, what about planting those seeds? Well, seeds need different things. The same way that people are different and need different things, there's some things that are the same and some that are different. So there's often instructions on the back of the seed for how deep to put the seed, how often to water it, what kind of temperature the seed likes. So take some time to pay attention to what your seeds are already telling you with the instructions they come with. You can also find a lot of resources online for your specific seed. Some things that I would like to encourage you to do are to reuse creative items around the home to minimize your use of plastics, which are derived from fossil fuels and are a non-renewable resource. A lot of us are getting materials at home right now that can help remind us that we have the power to make some choices about our use of fossil fuels. Like if you have takeout containers or food containers. This came from some crackers that I had. Egg cartons are a great tool for planting your seeds. And you would just put your soil right in there Sprinkle your seeds on top, maybe put a little more soil and pat them down, and then make sure that these get a good amount of water so that they don't dry out while the seed is germinating. Germinating means the seed is getting a signal from moisture to start poking out the first little root. And then after it pokes out its little root, it pokes out a cotyledon. A cotyledon is the first tiny little leaf already folded up inside the tiny seed. So after the cotyledon pops out, then comes the first true leaf. And when we're using materials like these, instead of going out and buying special pots, we're taking time to acknowledge that our use of resources matters, and we can have a positive impact on the climate just by choosing how we grow our food. Now, say that you don't have an option to grow food in your own home. I want to remind you that even the choices you make about your food can make an impact on the climate. Choosing food that is in season and local can have a huge impact. Transportation is the third leading cause of carbon emissions on our climate. That means that of all of the things that contribute carbon emissions into our atmosphere that causes climate change, the top 3 include transportation. So if you're choosing things that came from really far away, you're choosing food that has a bigger impact on the climate. But if you choose food that is close by, grown close by and in season, then your impact through your food choices has a lower negative impact on the climate. We learned a lot today about food and our connection to climate action. We learned about how to propagate and plant in water. We learned about how we can be creative when we're planting into soil and the containers we can use. And we learned about how choosing what we eat is another way that we can impact our climate in a positive way. Remember, this wave of climate action requires that you are nourished and well-fed. So take some time to learn about what you need and what kinds of changes you can make. Little changes add up and make a big difference. I hope you had a great time with me today talking about food and how to plant at home. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. And if you want to learn more about other classes at the YMCA of San Francisco, you can go to ymcasf.org/classroomsforall. I hope I see you again soon. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Did you know that YMCA of San Francisco never closed? When shelter in place happened, we could no longer provide in-person programming. We quickly shifted to provide youth and family programming virtually. As early as April, we started providing on-demand activities in our YMCA of San Francisco YouTube channel.
For this video, we're going to be making a geodesic dome.
Today, we're going to be making a hovercraft. The science around this activity is really awesome.
In addition, we have a regular schedule of activities for our youth and families to join live. We feature read-alouds, yoga, family Zumba, arts and crafts, drawing clubs, and more. So don't miss out on our virtual youth and family offerings. Visit www.ymcasf.org for more info and class schedules.